welcome back. I'm Cole Phillips, author of The Adventure of the Twisted Truths and host of the Book and Dagger. Today we're going to be continuing our read along of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And we're going to be starting where we left off, chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire. So Bilbo's escaped the goblins and he's escaped Gollum. He's got a magic ring, but he did not know where he was, and he had lost his hood, his cloak, his food, his pony, his buttons, and his friends. So he wandered on, and then he realizes he's actually on the other side of the Misty Mountains from where they started, which is good. Except that he doesn't have, like it said, he doesn't have food or supplies or his friends or his cloak or his buttons or any of that. Anyway, so he's wandering around and he hears voices. So he puts on the ring, turns invisible, and is creeping along. And then he suddenly saw appearing between two big boulders a head with a red hood on. It was Balin doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. So then Bilbo decides to give the dwarves a surprise, so he creeps along with the ring on, right past Balin, and he finds Gandalf and the rest of the dwarves arguing, and Gandalf is saying they've got to go back and look for Bilbo, and all the dwarves are saying that he's been more trouble than use, and they should just leave him. And Gandalf answers angrily, I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourself. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over. Whatever did you go and drop him for, Dory? You would have dropped him, said Dory, if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you in the back. Then why didn't you pick him up again? Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glambring, and Thorin was stabbing here and there and everywhere with Oakrest. All of a sudden, you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, follow me, everybody, and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you know quite well, till we had dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and helter-skelter down here. And here we are, without the burglar, confustigate. I'm sorry, I did not pronounce that word right. I have no idea what that word is. Him. Anyway, Bilbo then goes, here's the burglar, and steps out while taking his ring off, and everybody jumps in their surprise. And then Gandalf calls Balin. He tells him what he thinks of a lookout man, lets people walk in without announced. But anyway, basically the long and short of it is that the dwarves are like, oh, what happened? What'd you do? How'd you get out? So Bilbo tells him his story, except for the part about the ring, which he keeps secret. And the dwarves actually begin to feel they actually begin to get a respect for Bilbo. They actually really is what they thought of him was like down here. And now they're thinking, oh, wow, he's good. And so then Balin says, that's the first time anything, even a mouse, has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted. And I take off my hood to you, which he did. Balin, at your service, said he. Your servant, Mr. Baggins, said Bilbo. Anyway, so he gives him a little bit of a detailed account about his adventures, of course, not mentioning the ring. And Gandalf says, what did I tell you? Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess. He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed the part of his tale that he had left out. Anyway, so then the dwarves and Gandalf tell Bilbo what they've been doing, and Gandalf tells him what he did from how he rescued the dwarves and all that. And he tells him more a bit about the gate, and he says that the goblins will doubly guard the gate in the mountain after they've killed the great goblin and a bunch of goblins. And so all their spirits are kind of feeling good now because they've killed the great goblin, a bunch of goblins, and they've escaped successfully with their lives. But they also, as Gandalf says, they must get going because they don't really have any supplies, and they're still in danger, still very close to the mountains where hundreds and maybe thousands of goblins live. They don't have food, so excuse me. So Gandalf tells them they need to start trekking along. So they start doing that. They start making their way, and they don't have food. So Bilbo was looking around, and he's for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path. And he ate 3 wild strawberries they found on the bank, but it was not much good. Anyway, so as they're going along, they almost get caught in a rock slide, manage to escape, and then the sun is going down. Bilbo is asking if they must go any further, And then all of a sudden they heard a howl away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another away to the right and a good deal nearer to them, then by another not far to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's hole at home, but he knew that sound. He had had it described to him often enough in tales. One of her elder cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins and do not need to see you to catch you. What shall we do? What shall we do? What shall we do? He cried. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, he said, and it became a proverb, though now we say, out of the frying pan and into the fire, in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. Anyway, so Gandalf tells them to get up the trees. So all the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo, they climb up the trees, but Bilbo can't really climb. So he's scuttling around trying to find low branches, and Nori tells Dory, "You've left the burglar behind again." "Yeah, I can't always be carrying burglars on my back," said Dory. "Down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?" "He'll be eaten if we don't do something," said Thorin, for there were howls all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dory," he called, for Dory was lowest down in the easiest tree. "Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up." Dory was really a decent fellow in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far as ever he could. So Dory actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself. Only just in time, a wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up, and nearly got him. In a minute, there were a whole pack of them yelping all around the tree and leaping up at the trunk with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time they were safe. Luckily it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at any time, but in the cold and the wind with wolves all around below waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. Anyway, so more and more wolves keep coming in until there's hundreds of them because they actually are in a warg meeting place. And all the wargs are speaking to each other in warg, which Bilbo does not understand what Gandalf does. And Gandalf basically hears that the wargs and the goblins are going to go and start plundering the villages of the woodsmen who live nearby. And so Gandalf knows that that's not good. So basically, Gandalf begins to be afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel they were in a very bad place and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have it all their own way, though he could not do much stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree, then he set one alight with bright blue fire and threw it whizzing down among the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire. He was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. So then Gandalf starts just chucking flaming pine cones at the wolves and catching a bunch of them on fire. And this starts all this racket and commotion, which again gets the attention of some people far away on mountain peaks. "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on the top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately two of his guards from the rocks at either hand leapt up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down upon the ring of the wargs, a tiny spot far below. But eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking, and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves, and see the tiny flashes of fire, and hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath them. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Anyway, so the eagles, they all go flying down. He gets many other eagles. Excuse me. and they fly down towards the ring of the wolves and the meeting place of the goblins, which is a very good thing because the fires have spread and are starting to catch on the trees. And the goblins have already come running up, and because they thought a battle with the woodsman was going on. But when they get there, they actually are very amused by this because they see the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo stuck up in trees with flames all around. Because Gandalf's plan actually went a little out of whack, and now the trees that Bilbo and his friends are on are catching fire. So the goblins get the wolves out of there, and then they start shoving more dry tinder under the trees and spreading the fire so that way it'll burn Gandalf and the dwarves and Bilbo alive. And the goblins start dancing around and singing songs about 15 birds and 5 fir trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze, but funny little birds with no wings. And the goblins start singing songs about how they're going to burn the trees and ferns, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch to light the night for our delight. And Gandalf shouts at them to go away and that they're naughty little boys who shouldn't play with fire. But the goblins just start laughing again. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high, right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he probably would have killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt. But he never left. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and was gone. So then the eagles come and they pluck all Bilbo and the dwarves and Gandalf out of the tree, and they fly them to the mountain peaks, and they basically rescued them. And then they're taken before the Lord of the Eagles, and the Lord of the Eagles knows Gandalf because Gandalf has healed the Lord of the Eagles once from an arrow wound. And the Lord of the Eagles agrees to take Gandalf and the dwarves a little bit of the way, and they get them some meat that the dwarves then roast over fires. And Bilbo finally has a full belly, and he's in a safe place, so he sleeps. But all night he dreamed of his little house and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like. And that is the end of chapter 6. And we'll be back with chapter 7 soon.